You wake up in the year 1899, and let me tell you something with complete honesty. You are completely lost. The good news? You still have all your toes. The bad news? That's literally the best thing that can be said about your current situation. I'm Arthur Morgan, and after years riding through the most hostile territory of this country with the Vander Linde gang, I can guarantee you wouldn't last until lunch is placed. While you're there, comfortably lying in your modern bed, let me transport you to a reality that would make your worst nightmares seem like a Sunday picnic. The cold from the grisly mountains is penetrating through the thin walls of the cabin where Dutch decided it would be a good idea to hide after the disaster in Blackwater. Your lungs burn with every breath, and the air is so cold you can see your own breath forming little clouds of vapor that immediately disappear into the gray void of morning. Your bed is a pile of animal skins that John barely managed to hunt before almost dying of frostbite. They smell like dried blood, animal urine, and something you'd prefer not to identify. The mattress? It doesn't exist. The creaking wooden floor, with boards so separated you can see the frozen earth underneath, is all that separates your aching bones from the frozen ground. You move, and every joint in your body protests with a dull, constant pain. There's no central heating, no electric blankets, not even a basic thermal insulation system. What there is are cracks in the walls where the cutting mountain wind enters mercilessly, bringing with it small snowflakes that accumulate in the corner of the room like cruel reminders that nature has no pity for you. Now, let me paint a more detailed picture of this existence you romanticize in your games, but which in reality is a constant test of physical and mental endurance that would break even the toughest in a matter of hours. The first challenge of the day, simply getting out of bed without dying of hypothermia. You need to understand that in the Old West, especially in the mountains, the temperature can drop to 20 degrees below zero during the night. Your modern body, accustomed to central heating and adequate clothing, simply isn't prepared for this constant thermal assault. Your clothes are a pile of thick, heavy fabrics that never dry completely. The moisture from your own sweat, mixed with melted snow that constantly seeps through your cracked boots, creates a damp, cold environment against your skin that becomes fertile ground for infections and skin diseases. Every movement produces a muffled sound of wet fabric rubbing against wet fabric, accompanied by the constant creaking of leather stiffened by cold. Breakfast is a cruel joke. Your morning meal consists of dried meat that has the texture of wood and taste of pure salt, accompanied by coffee so strong and bitter it would make you spit on the first gulp. There's no sugar, no milk, not even the promise that the food won't make you sick. Pearson, our cook, does the best he can with limited supplies, but even his best creations are just palatable versions of basic survival. The water you drink comes directly from streams and wells that may or may not be contaminated with all kinds of bacteria and parasites. There are no filters, no purification, no guarantee at all that you won't wake up the next day with dysentery or something worse. Every gulp is a gamble with your own health, but the alternative is dehydration and death in a matter of days. The bathroom, that's an experience that would test the limits of your human dignity. You walk through snow to a small wooden construction that offers only the illusion of privacy, where you relieve yourself in a hole in the ground using leaves or any soft material you can find. In winter, this means exposing intimate parts of your body to temperatures that can cause frostbite in seconds. And then there's the question of personal hygiene. You haven't bathed in weeks. There are no showers, no bathtubs, no hot water available. Occasionally, you might clean yourself with melted snow, but this is such a traumatic, painful experience that many prefer to simply live with accumulated dirt. Your hair is oily and sticky. Your skin is covered by a layer of dirt, sweat, and God knows what else. Your teeth, there are no brushes, no toothpaste, no dental floss. You chew mint leaves when you can find them, or simply accept that your mouth will smell and taste like something that died long ago. Many gang members have already lost teeth to infections, and it's not uncommon to see grown men with smiles that look like poorly carved jack-o'-lanterns. Your hands are constantly cracked and bleeding due to extreme cold and constant manual labor. There are no moisturizing creams, no adequate gloves. Your hands are tools you use until they break and then continue using because there's no alternative. Your nails are black with dirt that never comes out completely, and small cuts and scratches turn into open wounds that take weeks to heal properly. But maybe you think you can handle physical discomfort. Let me then tell you about the constant psychological terror of living knowing that any minor injury can become your death sentence. A small cut on your finger can evolve into gangrene in a matter of days. There are no antibiotics, no modern surgery, not even adequate antiseptics. What there is are home remedies based on superstition and hope, applied by people who learned medicine through trial and error, where error frequently results in death. Micah had an arm infection last month that almost killed him. It started as a simple scratch from a branch during a ride, but in 2 days it was red, swollen, and leaking pus. We spent an entire week not knowing if he'd wake up the next morning, while Susan tried to treat the wound with grain alcohol and clean rags that weren't really clean. Tuberculosis haunts our camp like a silent ghost. You can hear it in some of the men's lungs, that dry, persistent cough that gradually becomes more violent, more frequent, until blood starts to appear. There's no treatment, no cure, not even adequate isolation. When someone develops TB, it's just a matter of time before it spreads to other group members. And then there are venereal diseases, so common in this era, they're almost considered an inevitable part of adult life. The prostitutes of Valentine and St. Denis carry infections that can cause dementia, blindness, and slow, painful death. Men know this, but the alternative is an existence of complete abstinence in a world where physical pleasure is one of the only escapes from daily brutality. Typhus is another silent killer, transmitted by lice and fleas that are constant companions on our journey. You develop high fever, debilitating headaches, and skin rashes that itch so much you scratch yourself bloody. In a matter of days, you're delirious, and in a week, you might be dead. Food poisoning is a weekly occurrence. The meat we eat is often questionable, preserved with coarse salt, and left in the open air for days. There's no refrigeration, no expiration date, no guarantee that the animal you're eating died of natural causes. Regularly, someone in camp spends days vomiting and having violent diarrhea, losing weight and strength while struggling to keep any food in their stomach. The wounds you sustain during fights or accidents become complex medical problems without access to adequate care. Bill was hit by a tree branch during our last escape and developed a deep cut on his forehead that simply refuses to heal properly. Every day, Susan cleans the wound with whiskey while Bill screams and grits his teeth, but the infection keeps coming back. The skin around it is red and hot to the touch, and we all know that if the infection spreads, Bill could lose his eye, or worse. Charles told me about a man he met during his travels who had a bullet lodged in his shoulder for 3 months. There was no surgeon available to remove it, so the man simply lived with pieces of metal moving inside his muscles, causing constant pain and recurring infections. Eventually, the arm became so infected it had to be amputated with a carpenter's saw and no anesthesia beyond a bottle of whiskey. The reality is that any injury requiring more than basic bandaging is potentially fatal. Broken bones that aren't set properly result in permanent deformities. Karen regularly twists her ankle due to an old injury that was never properly treated and now walks with a permanent limp that gets worse every winter. But let's suppose you can handle diseases and physical discomfort. Now you need to face the reality that you're living in a society where violence isn't just common, it's the primary language through which conflicts are resolved. Yesterday, in Valentine, I saw a man beaten to death over an argument about a poker game. It wasn't premeditated murder or a crime of passion. It was simply the logical result of two drunk men who couldn't reach a civilized agreement. The punches started in the tavern, continued in the street, and ended with a man dead in the mud, while children watched from nearby house windows. The law, when it exists, is enforced by men who are often more criminal than those they pursue. Local sheriffs are bought by wealthy ranchers or corrupt businessmen, and justice is distributed based on how much money you have in your pocket and how many armed friends are on your side. Carrying a weapon isn't a choice, it's an absolute necessity for survival. But here's the thing, even if you have a weapon, you need to be willing to use it, and using a weapon means being prepared to kill another human being. There are no warnings, no warning shots, no second chances. When you draw your weapon, it's because you've decided you're ready to take a life or lose yours. The honor system I observe in the people around me is complex and brutal. A man who doesn't respond to an insult with violence is considered a coward and becomes a target for more abuse. A man who responds with excessive violence is considered unstable and dangerous, becoming a social outcast. Finding the right balance between these two extremes is a survival skill that takes years to master, and many men die before learning adequately. Bar fights aren't entertainment, they're lessons in applied anatomy. You quickly learn where to hit to break ribs, how to twist an arm to dislocate it, where to stick a knife to cause maximum damage without killing immediately. These aren't skills you want to have, but they're skills you need to have if you want to survive. And then there are the Pinkertons, federal law, agents who hunt us like wild animals. They're not interested in capturing criminals alive. They want our bodies, dead or alive, because it's easier to transport corpses than prisoners. Every morning I wake up, I know it could be the day a Pinkerton rifle bullet goes through my head from 200 meters away. Violence in the Old West doesn't just happen in saloons and formal duels, it permeates every aspect of daily life. Ranchers kill each other over water rights, miners kill each other over land claims, merchants hire gunmen to eliminate competitors. Even family disputes can escalate to shootouts that leave entire families dead. Hosea told me about a family he met near Strawberry that completely destroyed itself over an inheritance. Two brothers couldn't agree on who would inherit their father's ranch, so they decided to settle the matter with guns. The shootout resulted in the death of both brothers, their wives, and two of their children. The only survivors were children too small to hold guns, who were left orphaned and without resources. The brutality of law enforcement is something that would shock modern people. Lynchings are not only common, but are considered public entertainment. Entire families come to watch hangings, bringing picnics and making it a social event. Children are lifted onto their parents' shoulders to get a better view of a man's dying agony. Prisoners are often tortured to extract confessions, and these tortures are performed in public to discourage others from committing crime. Dutch showed me burn scars from branding irons that a sheriff in New Austin used on him when he was younger, trying to make him admit to stealing horses he had never stolen. The concept of due process simply doesn't exist in most of the Old West. If you're accused of a crime by someone with enough influence, you'll be considered guilty regardless of evidence. Witnesses can be bought, evidence can be fabricated, and judges can be intimidated or bribed. Now let's talk about something you might not have considered: the complete social and psychological isolation of living as an outlaw in the Old West. You can't visit towns for long without risking being recognized. You can't form lasting friendships with people outside the gang because you might have to kill them or flee without warning. You can't settle anywhere, can't build a house, can't plant a garden, can't have pets beyond your horse. Your family, if you have one, you'll need to abandon them or put them in constant danger. John struggles with this every day. He loves Abigail and Jack, but knows his presence in their lives is a death sentence. Every goodnight kiss could be the last. Every hug could be a final goodbye. The loneliness is overwhelming. Even surrounded by gang members, you're fundamentally alone because you can't completely trust anyone. Micah could turn you into the Pinkertons for a few dollars. Dutch could sacrifice you in one of his grandiose plans. Even John, my brother in everything but blood, could abandon me if it meant saving his own family. You have no entertainment beyond drinking, playing cards, and occasionally listening to someone play guitar around the campfire. There are no books. Most men are illiterate. No newspapers, except occasionally when someone manages to steal one from town. No music beyond what you make yourselves. The nights are infinitely long and dark. There's no electricity, no artificial light beyond campfires that need to be constantly fed. When the sun sets, you have maybe 3 hours of weak firelight before being forced to sleep or sit in complete darkness. Darkness isn't just absence of light, it's active presence of fear, because you don't know what predators, human or animal, might be approaching. The emotional isolation becomes even deeper when you consider there's no reliable communication system with the outside world. Letters can take weeks to reach destinations if they arrive at all. There are no phones, no telegraphs accessible to wanted criminal. If something happens to people you love in other cities or states, you might never know. Tilly told me about a letter she received 6 months after her mother's death. The letter was from a neighbor informing about the funeral, but it arrived so late that Tilly missed not only the chance to say goodbye, but also to arrange any kind of arrangements or inheritance. Her mother was buried in a pauper's grave, and all the family's possessions were sold to pay debts. The lack of geographical stability adds another layer to isolation. We never know where we'll be next week, much less next month. We can't put down roots anywhere, can't get to know neighbors or local merchants. Every town we visit is full of strangers who might recognize us from wanted posters, and every friendly face might hide hostile intentions. Let me now explain how you'd make money in this world, because even as an outlaw, you still need resources to survive. Robbing banks seems glamorous in books and legends, but in reality, it's extremely dangerous work that rarely pays off. Most small banks have only a few $100s in cash, but are guarded by armed men specifically hired to kill thieves. For every successful robbery, there are 5 that end with the thieves dead at the bank entrance. Train robberies are equally dangerous. Trains carry armed guard, and the railroad hires bounty hunters to pursue anyone who dares interfere with their operations. Even if you manage to stop a train and rob the passengers, you'll probably only get a few dollars and some jewelry that's hard to sell without attracting attention. Honest work, when you can find it, is physically devastating and pays almost nothing. Working on a ranch means 14 hours a day under the scorching sun, moving cattle that weighs more than you and can kill you with a well-placed kick. Your hands become raw from holding ropes, your back constantly aches from carrying heavy loads, and at the end of the week, you receive enough money to buy a few meals and maybe a bath. Mining is even worse. You spend the entire day in dark, cramped tunnels, breathing air loaded with dust that gradually destroys your lungs. Accidents are common. Tunnels collapse, toxic gases accumulate, tools break, and cause serious injuries. Miners who manage to survive long enough to retire rarely live long afterward, coughing up blood and struggling to breathe. Hunting to sell pelts is one of the few professions that offers some independence, but it's also one of the most dangerous. You spend weeks alone in the wilderness, where bears, wolves, and panthers see you as a potential meal. Cold can kill you, hunger can kill you, an infected wound can kill you, and even if you manage to hunt enough animals, you still need to transport the pelts to town without being robbed by other hunters or bandits. Charles has more hunting experience than any of us, but even he's almost died several times. Once, he was cornered by a wolf pack for 3 days, forced to hide in a tree while the animals waited patiently below. He survived by eating tree bark and drinking melted snow, but lost 2 toes to frostbite. The most brutal economic aspect of life in the Old West is that there's no social safety net whatsoever. If you get hurt and can't work, you simply starve to death. If you get sick, there's no health insurance or disability benefits. If you age beyond the capacity for physical labor, you're abandoned by society to die of exposure. Hosea, even being the wisest and most experienced among us, knows his advanced age makes him a potential burden to the gang. He doesn't talk about it, but I see the worry in his eyes when his arthritis prevents him from riding properly, or when his hands shake too much to shoot accurately. In a society that only values physical strength and gun skills, wisdom and experience offer no protection against obsolescence. The only forms of financial security are violent or extremely risky. Some men become professional gunfighters, selling their shooting skills to whoever pays most. Others become bounty hunters, pursuing criminals for blood money. Some get involved in high-stakes card games, betting weeks of work on a single hand. Now, let me be brutally honest about what this life does to your mind over time. You start seeing people as resources or threats, not as individual human beings. That woman on Valentine Street, does she have money we can steal? That rancher traveling alone, can he identify us to authorities? Later, your basic humanity gradually erodes until you become a survival machine that happens to have consciousness. Sleep becomes irregular and disturbed. You wake up to any noise, always expecting it to be the sound of approaching horses or guns being cocked. Nightmares are common, but dreams aren't about monsters. They're real memories of men you've killed, places you've burned, people you've left behind. You develop justified paranoia about authorities. Every sheriff might have a wanted poster with your face. Every stranger might be an undercover detective. Every casual conversation might be an attempt to extract information that could lead to your capture. Depression is a constant companion, but there's no word for it in this era. You simply accept that life is an endless series of suffering, punctuated by occasional moments of temporary relief. The idea of genuine happiness becomes strange and distant. You lose the ability to form deep emotional connections because you know everything is temporary. Friends die, women leave, places are abandoned. Emotionally investing in anything becomes a form of masochism. What's particularly devastating is the gradual loss of your moral identity. When you kill your first man, it's traumatic and disturbing. When you kill the 10th, it's just another obstacle removed from your path. This transformation doesn't happen all at once. It's a slow erosion of your humanity that you only notice when it's too late to reverse. Mary Beth asked me once if I still remember the name of the first man I killed. The truth is, I remember, but I also remember that I stopped caring long ago. This loss of empathy isn't a conscious choice. It's a psychological defense mechanism that allows you to continue functioning in a world where killing becomes routine. Nature in the Old West isn't a peaceful escape from civilization. It's a hostile environment that's constantly trying to kill you. Bears aren't cute cartoon animals. They're 300-kilogram killing machines that can run faster than horses and break your spine with a single swipe. Encountering a bear in the wild means you have about 3 seconds to decide whether you'll fight, flee, or die, and 2 of those options probably result in death. Wolves hunt in packs and are intelligent enough to use group tactics. They'll surround you, attack your horse first to leave you on foot, and then attack you when you're vulnerable. A lone wolf can be killed with a firearm. A wolf pack will kill you even if you have an arsenal. Venomous snakes are everywhere and are practically invisible until it's too late. A rattlesnake bite can kill you in a matter of hours, and you probably won't even see the snake that bit you. There's no antidote, no adequate medical treatment. You simply hope the venom isn't enough to kill you. Panthers are silent assassins that can jump from trees and break your neck before you even know they're there. They're big enough to drag a grown man into the forest, but small and agile enough to disappear into shadows without a trace. Horses, even well-trained ones, are 500-kilogram animals with minds of their own. They can be spooked by anything: a breaking branch, a strange smell, a moving shadow. When a horse decides to bolt, you have two options: jump out of the way or be trampled to death. But animal predators aren't the only dangers in the wilderness. The terrain itself is a constant enemy. Cliffs hidden by dense vegetation can send you and your horse plummeting hundreds of meters. Swamps can look like solid ground, but suck you down like quicksand. Rivers that seem shallow can have underwater currents that drag experienced swimmers to the bottom. Weather can change from benign to deadly in a matter of minutes. Plains storms arrive like solid walls of wind and hail that can knock down trees and break bones. Flash floods transform peaceful streams into violent torrents that carry everything in their path. Tornadoes form on the horizon and move across the landscape like fingers of divine destruction. During winter months, blizzards can last for days, creating whiteout, conditions where you can't see your hand in front of your face. Temperature can drop so quickly that exposure for just a few minutes results in permanent frostbite. People get lost just meters from safety and are found dead in spring, frozen in positions suggesting they died trying to dig through snow with bare hands. In summer, heat is equally brutal. Desert temperatures can exceed 50 degrees Celsius, and there's no adequate shade for hundreds of kilometers. Dehydration happens faster than you imagine, and symptoms include mental confusion that prevents you from making rational decisions about finding water or shelter. Lenny told me about a man he found in the desert near Armadillo, walking in circles and talking to people who weren't there. The man had been lost for 3 days and had drunk his own urine trying to stay hydrated. When Lenny finally managed to get him to town, the man died a few hours later, his organs having already failed due to extreme dehydration. Insects are another constant torment during warmer months. Mosquito swarms can be so dense they obscure your vision and make breathing difficult. They carry malaria, yellow fever, and other diseases that can kill you weeks after the initial bite. Ticks attach in places you can't see or reach, transmitting spotted fever that causes delirium and death in a matter of days. Africanized bees attack in swarms and chase victims for kilometers. A single irritated colony can kill a grown man in minutes, covering him with thousands of venomous stings. Even if you survive the initial attack, the venom can cause kidney failure days later. The social rules in the Old West are complex and deadly. An etiquette mistake can literally result in your death. Looking at another man's woman the wrong way can result in a duel. Not paying for a drink you promised to buy can ruin your reputation in an entire town. Using the wrong words or tone can quickly escalate to lethal violence. Hospitality is both extreme and conditional. Strangers might be received with genuine generosity, but that same generosity can turn into mortal hostility if you break unwritten rules that nobody explained to you. Drinking is a mandatory social activity, but also extremely dangerous. Armed drunk men regularly kill each other for reasons that would seem trivial by modern standards. An argument about politics, sports, or women can end with bodies on the floor. Card games are social minefields. Cheating is common and expected, but getting caught cheating is a capital offense. Accusing someone of cheating when you can't prove it is equally dangerous. Winning too much money can make you a target for robbery or violence. Respectable women and prostitutes exist in completely separate social worlds, and confusing the two can have severe consequences. Speaking to a married woman the way you'd speak to a prostitute can result in you being beaten or killed by her husband. Even seemingly harmless gestures can be interpreted as mortal insults. Pointing with your finger is considered extremely rude. Not removing your hat in the presence of a lady is a grave disrespect. Spitting in someone's direction, even accidentally, can be seen as a direct challenge. Sean told me about a fight that started because a man sighed too loudly during a conversation in a tavern. The other man interpreted it as a sign of disrespect and immediately challenged him to a duel. Both men died, one from a shot to the chest, the other from a bullet wound that got infected a week later. The economy of reputation is crucial and relentless. Being labeled a coward can make you useless for any kind of work requiring interaction with other men. Being known as a troublemaker can result in constant challenges from young men wanting to build their own reputations. Being considered excessively violent can make you a social outcast, avoided by respectable people. Traveling in the Old West is a journey through constant dangers that test the limits of human endurance. Roads are rudimentary trails that become impassable during rain, snow, or extreme dry period. Road is a generous term for ruts in the earth created by previous wagon wheels. During summer, you breathe constant dust that covers everything: your food, your water, your lungs. During rains, roads become mud swamps that can swallow entire wagons. Bridges are temporary, dangerous structures built with local wood and hope. They collapse regularly, sending riders and wagon into turbulent rivers below. Many bridges are just logs placed across streams, slippery and treacherous even in good weather. Rivers need to be forded, which means riding through waters that can be any depth and may have currents much stronger than they appear. Horses can be swept away by currents, riders can be knocked down and drowned, equipment can be lost in turbulent waters. Mountain canyons are especially dangerous. Narrow trails with cliffs hundreds of meters on one side and rock walls on the other. A horse that slips or a moment of distraction can result in a fatal fall. Loose rocks fall constantly, and there's no protection against avalanches during winter. Traveling at night is almost impossible and extremely dangerous. Without artificial lighting, you depend completely on moonlight, which can be obscured by clouds at any moment. Horses can step in holes, trip over invisible obstacles, or simply refuse to continue in unknown territory. The logistics of long trips is a constant nightmare. You need to carry enough water to last between known sources, but water is heavy and limits how many other supplies you can take. Food spoils quickly in hot weather and freezes solid in cold weather. Ammunition is expensive and heavy, but you can't travel without it. Forage for horses isn't always available, especially during droughts or winter. A hungry horse can't carry heavy loads and may die of exhaustion. Horseshoes wear out or are lost, leaving horses lame and useless. Horse injuries can become infected and result in the loss of your only means of transportation. Bandits operate along all major travel routes. Knowing the best places for ambushes, they choose locations where travelers are forced to travel slowly, steep climbs, narrow passages, densely forested area. Once you're robbed, there's no authority to report. The crime too, and pursuing the bandits alone, is suicide. Hostile indigenous peoples still control vast areas of territory, and their warfare tactics are efficient and brutal. They know the terrain perfectly, can move silently through any type of landscape, and attack when and where they're least expected. Survivors of indigenous attacks often report they never saw their attackers until it was too late. Even other travelers can be dangerous. Desperate men might kill for supplies, women, or simply to steal horses. Groups of armed men might decide it's easier to rob other travelers than hunt or work for food. There's no way to know strangers' intentions until it's too late to protect yourself. St. Denis might be considered a big city for the era, but there's no sewage system. Human waste is dumped in holes behind houses or simply thrown in the streets. The smell is unbearable, especially during summer, and diseases spread quickly through contaminated water. There's no organized garbage collection. Trash is thrown in streets, where it's eaten by pigs, stray dogs, and rats. Animal carcasses rot where they fall until someone decides to drag the remains out of town. The accumulation of organic debris creates a perfect environment for disease proliferation. Water supply comes from wells that are often contaminated by waste infiltration. There's no water treatment, no quality testing. Cholera, dysentery, and typhus spread regularly through contaminated water supply. Fires are a constant threat. Most buildings are wooden, heated by open fires, lit by candles and oil lamps. When a fire starts, it can easily destroy entire blocks before being controlled. There are no organized fire departments in most towns. Crime is endemic, and law enforcement is inconsistent. Pickpockets, thieves, con artists, and murderers operate openly. Entire neighborhoods are controlled by gangs that charge protection from merchants. Women can't walk alone after nightfall without serious risk of assault or worse. Taverns are simultaneously necessary social centers and focal points of mortal violence. They're the only places where men can gather for business, socialization, and entertainment, but they're also where alcohol, weapons, and explosive temperaments regularly combine with fatal results. Prostitution is widely accepted but extremely dangerous for both the women involved and clients. Prostitutes operate without any legal protection and are regularly beaten, robbed, or killed by violent clients. Venereal diseases are endemic and incurable, spreading freely through these networks. Gambling is omnipresent but controlled by professionals who cheat systematically. Losing large amounts of money in games often results in violence when desperate losers try to recover their losses through force. Men kill and die over poker pots, worth more than they earned in months of work. Family structure in the Old West is shaped by survival needs that often destroy emotional bonds. Children are forced into adult work as soon as they can walk. 7-year-old boys tend cattle, operate dangerous machinery, and carry weapons. Girls the same age cook over open fires, care for younger siblings, and perform strenuous domestic work. There's no concept of protected childhood. Marriages are economic arrangements, not romantic unions. Families trade daughters for dowry, land, or political alliances. Women often marry men they've never met, move to completely strange places, and are expected to produce children immediately. Child mortality is so high that many families don't name children until they're sure they'll survive the first years. Losing 3 or 4 children during infancy is considered normal. Parents learn not to attach emotionally to children because the pain of constant loss would be unbearable. Elderly people are often abandoned when they become unable to contribute economically to the family. There are no nursing homes, no government pensions, no social support system. When you become too old to work, you starve or die of exposure. Domestic violence is not only accepted but encouraged as a method of maintaining family order. Husbands beat wives, fathers beat children, and this is seen as necessary discipline. There are no resources for domestic abuse victims, no legal concept of women's or children's rights. Abigail told me about her own childhood, where she saw her father regularly beat her mother until she became deaf in one ear due to repeated blows to the head. When Abigail tried to intervene at 12 years old, her father broke her arm with a piece of wood. She ran away from home at 14 and became a prostitute because it was literally safer than continuing to live with family. Education for children is practically non-existent. Most families can't spare children from work long enough to learn to read and write. Schools, when they exist, are mainly attended by children of wealthy families who can afford both the classes and the loss of child labor. Dutch van der Linde has grand ideas about our family and our principles, but the reality is we're a group of desperate people trying to survive through increasingly desperate means. Every decision we make is based not on morality, but on immediate practical necessity. The camp needs to be moved constantly to avoid detection. This means we never have time to establish basic comforts. There are no adequate latrines, no drainage systems, no permanent structures for weather protection. We live like nomads, but without the cultural experience of generations of real nomads. Pearson works miracles with the limited supplies we manage to get, but his best meals would still be considered inedible by modern standards. Often half-spoiled meat, wilted and dried vegetables, seasonings that are mainly coarse salt and pepper when we are lucky. Interpersonal tensions are constant and dangerous. Armed men with explosive temperaments, forced to live in constant proximity, regularly come close to violence. Micah and John almost killed each other last week over an argument about who should feed the horses. Susan Grimshaw tries to maintain some order and cleanliness, but it's a lost battle against the reality of our existence. There's no privacy, no adequate hygiene, no personal space. We sleep practically on top of each other, share clothes and equipment, and live constantly in each other's smell and noise. The women in camp face unique challenge. They need to maintain some appearance of respectability while living as outlaws, need to contribute to group survival without the resources or training the men have, and need to navigate the sexual and romantic tension that arise when desperate people are forced to live together. Mary Beth tries to maintain her femininity by reading stolen novels and writing in a diary made from pages torn from abandoned books. But the reality is, she also knows how to shoot, can pickpocket with the best dexterity of any of us, and has seen enough violence to traumatize veteran soldiers. Karen numbs herself with alcohol to deal with the brutality of our existence, but this only adds another layer of danger for her and all of us. A drunk woman in a camp full of armed, frustrated men is a recipe for disaster, and we all know it, but nobody knows how to handle the situation without causing even more problems. Tilly works hard to maintain some structure and normalcy in camp, but the reality is there's nothing normal about our situation. We're constantly one step ahead of the law, one mistake away from prison or death, one betrayal away from complete destruction. Sadie Adler transformed her pain into fury, and that fury has made her efficient at violence, but it's also consuming her from the inside out. She kills with a coldness that sometimes scares me, and I see in her eyes a darkness I recognize in men who've killed too much and for too long. The reality is, our family is held together mainly by mutual fear and dependence for survival. We know too much about each other to leave peacefully, and we know too little about the outside world to survive alone. We're trapped together by circumstances none of us completely chose. Dutch always talks about his grand plans and his life philosophy, but the reality of leading a group of desperate outlaws is very different from the eloquent words he uses around the campfire. Every decision he makes can result in the death of someone I consider family, and the weight of that responsibility is clearly eroding his mental sanity. I see it in his eyes when he thinks nobody's looking, a constant restlessness, growing paranoia, a tendency to make increasingly risky decisions when conservative plans fail. Hosea tries to be the voice of reason, but Dutch is becoming increasingly resistant to advice from anyone, including his oldest and most trusted friend. Micah Bell is like poison that has spread through our group. He whispers in Dutch's ear, feeding his paranoias and ambitions, pushing us toward increasingly dangerous and morally questionable decisions. Micah has no loyalty to anything beyond himself, and we all know it, but Dutch seems unable to see through the obvious manipulations. Micah's toxic influence is creating divisions within the gang that could destroy us more effectively than any external force. He plants seeds of distrust among members, questions the loyalty of people who've proven their dedication through years of shared risks, and constantly pushes for more violent and extreme actions. John and I have been talking privately about our growing concern with the direction Dutch is taking. We both see signs that the man we've followed for so many years is losing himself in his own grandiose fantasies, losing touch with the practical reality of keeping people alive in a hostile world. But confronting Dutch directly would be seen as insubordination, and in a group where hierarchy is maintained through force and intimidation, questioning the leader can quickly escalate to mortal violence. So we continue following orders we know are imprudent, participating in schemes we know are excessively risky, because the alternative is complete fragmentation of the only support system we have. The erosion of group cohesion is evident in small daily details. Conversations around the campfire are less frequent and more tense. People avoid certain other people. Secrets are kept where there used to be transparency. Dutch's paranoia is spreading through all of us like a contagious disease. Bill Williamson has been becoming increasingly violent and reckless, probably trying to prove his worth to Dutch and compensate for his lack of intelligence with growing brutality. Javier is caught between his personal loyalty to Dutch and his growing awareness that we're heading in a dangerous direction. Charles keeps his opinions to himself, but I see disapproval in his eyes when Dutch proposes his wildest schemes. The money question is becoming desperate. Every job we do yields less money and attracts more attention from authorities. The Pinkertons are becoming more organized and efficient at tracking us. The bounties on our heads are increasing, making every public appearance more risky. At the same time, our costs are increasing. We need more ammunition because we're getting into more shootouts. We need more medical supplies because we're getting injured more frequently. We need more horses because we're losing ours to injury, death, or confiscation. We need to change camps more frequently, abandoning supplies and equipment with each move. The brutal mathematics of survival is becoming unsustainable, but Dutch refuses to acknowledge the reality of the numbers. He keeps talking about one last big score that will solve all our problems, as if money were the only issue we face, and not the growing attention of federal agencies determined to destroy us. Hosea has tried to convince Dutch to consider the possibility of splitting into smaller groups, or even completely abandoning criminal life and trying to establish ourselves honestly somewhere. But Dutch sees any suggestion of change as betrayal of his ideals and the memory of all we've already lost. The reality is we're trapped in a downward spiral that can only have one ending. The more desperate we become, the more risks we take. The more risks we take, the more attention we attract. The more attention we attract, the more desperate we become. It's a vicious cycle that's consuming us from the inside out. And there are still aspects of life in the Old West that make even moments of relative calm into trials of endurance. Constant boredom, for example, is something modern people can hardly comprehend. Without entertainment beyond what we can create for ourselves, without books to read, without music beyond what we play, without recreational activities beyond drinking and playing cards, days stretch endlessly. This boredom isn't simply inconvenient, it's psychologically corrosive. Human minds weren't designed to be idle for long periods, especially when surrounded by constant tension and danger. Bored men do stupid things. They start fights for trivial reasons, take unnecessary risks, or simply go quietly insane. Alcoholism is endemic, not just because of stress, but because alcohol is literally the only escape available from the brutal reality of daily existence. When Uncle drinks until unconscious, it's not just moral weakness, it's a desperate attempt to find temporary relief from a life that offers little beyond suffering and fear. Karen drinks because she's seen too much violence to process adequately. Sean drank because his youth was stolen by circumstances that forced him to become a killer before even becoming a man. Every person in camp has their own reasons for seeking oblivion at the bottom of a bottle, and judging those reasons would be hypocrisy on my part. Religion in the Old West is another aspect that adds layers of psychological complexity to daily existence. Reverend Swanson struggles with his faith in a world that seems to contradict all basic notions of divine justice or celestial benevolence. How do you maintain belief in a loving God when you see children die of curable diseases, when good men are killed by criminals, when justice is more often served by violence than by law? But at the same time, faith offers the only hope of meaning in an existence that would otherwise be absurdly brutal and purposeless. Even people who've lost belief in specific doctrines still cling to the idea that there must be some greater meaning in their suffering, some reason they're being tested so severely. Prayers are offered not because people expect answers, but because the act of praying is one of the only ways to maintain some connection with concepts like hope and human dignity. When Reverend Swanson performs impromptu sermons around the campfire, It's not because anyone expects divine salvation, but because we all need occasional reminders that we still possess human souls. The inherent hypocrisy in violent outlaws gathering for prayer isn't lost on anyone, but this contradiction is simply another of the impossible complexities of existence in the Old West. You kill a man on Monday and pray for forgiveness on Tuesday, not because you believe it will solve anything, but because the alternative is accepting that you're simply a wild animal without moral conscience. Women face additional layers of brutality that men never fully experience. Abigail has to deal not only with all the dangers the rest of us face, but also with the reality that her physical safety depends entirely on protection from armed men who could decide at any moment she's no longer worth protecting. Sadie lost everything she loved in a way that transformed her into something I don't always recognize as completely human. Her thirst for vengeance is understandable, but also terrifying in its intensity. She kills with a coldness that sometimes surpasses even Micah's, and I see in her eyes a darkness I recognize in soldiers who've seen too many battles. Mary Beth tries to maintain her femininity and romantic hopes in a world that systematically destroys both. Her books and dreams are survival mechanisms as much as the weapons we carry, but they're also constant reminders of a world of possibilities she'll probably never experience. Tilly works tirelessly to maintain structure and normalcy in circumstances that are fundamentally abnormal and destructive. Her strength comes from her refusal to accept that our current situation is permanent, but that same refusal sometimes leaves her unprepared for the brutality we actually face. Karen self-medicates with alcohol in a way that's simultaneously self-destructive and understandable. In a world without therapists or antidepressants, where psychological trauma is seen as moral weakness, alcohol offers the only available relief for emotional pain that would otherwise be unbearable. Molly is in love with a romanticized version of Dutch that doesn't correspond to the real man, and this dissonance is destroying her emotionally. She represents what happens when romantic fantasies collide with brutal realities, and watching her psychological deterioration is like watching an accident in slow motion. The power dynamics within camp are complex and constantly changing. Dutch maintains authority through a combination of charisma, intimidation, and everyone's mutual dependence for survival. But that authority is being eroded by circumstances and his own questionable decisions. Hosea offers wisdom and perspective, but his influence is diminishing as Dutch becomes more receptive to Micah's poisonous whispers. John and I represent the new generation of potential leadership, but questioning Dutch directly would be seen as insubordination that could fatally divide the gang. Micah is systematically undermining relationships within the group, planting seeds of distrust and paranoia that serve his own interests. He's intelligent enough to understand that a united group would be too strong for him to manipulate, so he constantly works to create divisions he can exploit. Charles keeps his opinions to himself most of the time, but his experience and skills make him too valuable to ignore completely. Javier is caught between conflicting loyalties that are forcing him into impossible choices. Bill compensates for his lack of intelligence with fierce loyalty, but even that loyalty has limits. Lenny represents uncorrupted youth and possibility, but he's also being gradually hardened by the realities of our existence. Sean was a reminder that it was still possible to find joy and humor even in brutal circumstances, but his death eliminated one of the few sources of lightness in our lives. The loss of gang members isn't just a reduction in our fighting strength, it's a gradual erosion of our collective humanity. Each death makes us a little more desperate, a little more willing to take extreme risk, a little less connected to basic concepts of morality and decency. And then there are practical aspects of criminal life that popular romanticizations ignore completely. Planning a robbery isn't an exciting exercise in strategy. It's a tedious, stressful process of trying to anticipate hundreds of variables that can kill you if you guess wrong. You need to know guard schedules, but those schedules can change without warning. You need to know escape routes, but those routes might be blocked by construction, weather, or law enforcement. You need to know the location of money or valuables, but that information might be outdated or simply wrong. Every robbery is a gamble with your life based on incomplete information and assumptions that might be wrong. The most careful planning can be ruined by a single, unforeseen variable, a sick guard replaced by someone you didn't expect, a horse that goes lame at the wrong moment, a weapon that fails when you need it most. The execution of crimes is even more stressful than planning. Your adrenaline is so high, you might have trouble thinking clearly. Your hands might shake too much to shoot accurately. You might forget crucial parts of the plan under pressure. You might become so focused on one specific threat that you completely miss other threats. And even when everything goes perfectly according to plan, you still face long-term consequences. Every successful crime increases your reputation and the bounties on your head. Every successful crime also increases authorities' determination to capture you. Criminal success is self-destructive in the long run. The most brutal aspect of organized crime is that you are constantly betraying people who may not deserve it. Robbing a bank means stealing money that belongs to ordinary people who work hard. Robbing a train means terrorizing innocent passengers who are just trying to travel. Extorting merchants means destroying businesses that families have built over generations. You can try to convince yourself that you're only stealing from the rich who can afford it, but the reality is that your actions have consequences that ripple through entire communities. Bank employees lose jobs, families lose savings, merchants are forced into bankruptcy. Entire communities can be economically devastated by the actions of a small group of outlaws. The guilt for these consequences accumulates over time, adding psychological weight to an existence that is already nearly unbearable. You can try to suppress these feelings with alcohol or justifying philosophies, but they never really go away. They accumulate somewhere deep in your mind, gradually corrupting your ability to see yourself as a fundamentally good person. And there are still aspects of violence that are difficult to communicate to people who have never killed another human being. The physical act of killing someone is traumatic in ways that stay with you forever. The sound a man makes when a bullet pierces his lungs is something you never forget. The dead weight of a human body is different from anything else you've ever carried. There are also technical aspects of violence that you only learn through direct experience. Different weapons cause different types of wounds. Some deaths are instantaneous, others are slow and agonizing. Some men die silently, others scream. Some accept death with dignity, others beg for their lives in ways that haunt your dreams. You learn where to shoot to kill instantly versus where to shoot to incapacitate. You learn how to use knives efficiently versus how to use fists. You learn the difference between killing out of necessity versus killing out of anger. All of these are skills that corrupt your soul as you learn them, but they are necessary skills for survival. The desensitization to violence happens gradually and without you fully realizing it. Your first death is traumatic and disturbing. Your 10th death is just another obstacle removed. Your 20th death is almost routine. This transformation is not a conscious choice. It's a psychological defense mechanism that allows you to continue functioning. But this desensitization has costs that you only realize too late. You lose the ability to form normal emotional connections. You lose empathy for people who haven't experienced similar violence. You lose the ability to imagine a future that doesn't include more violence. You become a survival machine that happens to retain human consciousness. The weapons we use are brutal tools that require constant maintenance and considerable skill to use effectively. A revolver is not just a tool you point and fire. It's a complex instrument that can fail in dozens of different ways, especially when not properly maintained. Black powder is corrosive and leaves residue that can clog delicate mechanisms. Ammunition can be defective, causing misfires at the worst possible moment. Metal parts can break due to repeated stress or impact. Wood can crack due to temperature or humidity changes. Each weapon is a collection of parts that can fail when you need them most. Keeping weapons functional requires specific supplies that aren't always available. Oil for cleaning and lubrication, clean rags for cleaning, replacement parts for broken components, specialized tools for disassembly and repairs, quality ammunition that doesn't cause failures. All these items cost money we may not have and may not be available when we need them. Accuracy with primitive firearms is much worse than modern representations suggest. Revolvers are accurate only at very short distances. Rifles are more accurate, but still limited by ammunition quality and environmental conditions. Shotguns are effective only at extremely short distances. Shooting at moving targets is extremely difficult and generally ineffective. Reloading weapons during combat is a slow and vulnerable process that can easily result in death. Paper cartridges need to be torn with teeth. Powder needs to be poured into the cylinder. Bullets need to be pressed in place. Percussion caps need to be placed on the nipples. This entire process takes precious time, during which you are defenseless. The smoke produced by black powder quickly obscures your vision and reveals your position to enemy. After a few shots, you may be shooting blind through a cloud of dense smoke. The sound of gunfire is deafening and can affect your ability to hear commands or approaching threats. The recoil of powerful weapons can affect your ability to shoot quickly and accurately. Bullet wounds in the Old West are often fatal, not because of immediate damage, but because of infections that develop later. Bullets carry dirt and fabric into wounds, creating perfect conditions for bacterial infection. Without antibiotics or modern surgery, even seemingly minor wounds can evolve into gangrene and death. Surgery to remove bullets is often more dangerous than leaving the bullets in place. Field surgeons use instruments that aren't sterile, operate without adequate anesthesia, and work mostly by trial and error. Many men survive the initial shot only to die on the operating table or from post-operative infection. Chronic pain from old wounds is a constant companion for anyone who has survived long enough to accumulate scars. There are no painkillers beyond alcohol and opium, both of which create their own problems. Broken bones that haven't healed properly cause arthritic pain. Scar tissue limits mobility and causes discomfort during weather changes. Bill carries bullet fragments in his left shoulder that couldn't be safely removed. They move and cause pain when he uses his arm in certain ways. During winter, the pain worsens due to changes in barometric pressure. During summer, the metal heats up and causes additional discomfort. There is no relief beyond alcohol and stoic acceptance. Javier has knife scars on his back that sometimes open again when he moves wrong. The skin never healed properly due to initial infection and is now fragile and prone to tears. He has learned to move in specific ways to avoid reopening the wounds, but this limits his mobility and effectiveness in combat. Charles carries burn scars from a campfire that spread across much of his chest. The burned skin doesn't sweat properly and is sensitive to temperature changes. During summer, it tends to dry out and crack. During winter, it becomes stiff and painful. There is no treatment beyond homemade ointments made from animal fat and medicinal plants. The accumulation of minor injuries over time is almost as debilitating as single major injuries. Broken fingers that were never properly set limit manual dexterity. Cracked ribs that didn't heal right cause respiratory pain. Repeated concussions cause chronic headaches and memory problems. Each gang member carries an inventory of pains and physical limitations that would be unimaginable to modern people. There is no physical therapy, no pain medication, no orthopedic surgery. You simply learn to function with what remains of your body after years of abuse and injury. The psychological aspect of living with chronic pain adds another layer to the brutality of existence. Constant pain affects mood patience, and ability to make rational decisions. People who are always suffering physically become more prone to violence, more irritable with companions, more willing to take unnecessary risks. The medicine available in the Old West is a dangerous mixture of superstition, oral tradition, and desperate experimentation. Proven remedies include bloodletting for anything that causes fever, mercury for venereal diseases, and opium for anything that causes pain. Many of these treatments are more dangerous than the conditions they supposedly cure. Trained doctors are rare and expensive, forcing most people to rely on local healers, midwives, or medical knowledge passed down through generations. This folk knowledge sometimes includes genuinely useful remedies based on medicinal plants, but also includes completely useless or actively harmful treatments. The lack of understanding about germs and infection means medical practices often spread diseases instead of curing them. Instruments aren't sterilized between patients. Water used for wound cleaning may be contaminated. Bandages are reused without proper cleaning. Doctors don't wash their hands between procedures. Diagnosis is based primarily on external observation and patient descriptions of symptoms. There are no X-rays, no blood tests, no microscopes to identify pathogens. Doctors make their best guesses based on limited knowledge and previous experience, but these guesses are often wrong. Surgery is performed without adequate understanding of internal anatomy, without reliable anesthesia, and without techniques to control bleeding or infection. Many operations that are routine today were almost certain death sentences. Appendectomies, for example, were virtually impossible to perform successfully. Childbirth is particularly dangerous due to the combination of potential complications and lack of adequate medical intervention. Postpartum hemorrhage kills women regularly. Babies in abnormal positions often cannot be saved. Post-birth infections are common and frequently fatal. Molly told me about a woman she knew who survived 8 births, but lost 5 children in infancy or during birth. This woman considered this relative luck because she knew other women who died during their first births or who lost all their children to childhood diseases. Infant mortality is so high that many families don't allow themselves to form strong emotional attachments to children until they're sure they'll survive the first years. This emotional distancing is a psychological survival mechanism, but it also creates family dynamic that would be considered cold or neglectful by modern standards. Children who survive infancy often carry lasting effects of malnutrition, untreated diseases, or injuries that never healed properly. Growth problems, permanent deformities, and physical disabilities are much more common than in modern times. There is no special education or accommodations for children with special needs, and yet, even with all these medical, physical, and psychological horror, there are aspects of life in the Old West that continue to test the limits of human endurance in ways we haven't even begun to fully explore. Intellectual loneliness is an aspect of life in the Old West that modern educated people would find particularly difficult to bear. The vast majority of people are functionally illiterate, limiting conversations to immediate practical topics or local gossip. There are no discussions about literature, philosophy, science, or world events. There is no exposure to ideas or perspectives from other cultures or regions. Mary Beth is one of the few people in camp who can actually read well, and she devours any written material we manage to find with a hunger that is almost desperate. But books are rare and expensive, and most of what we get are cheap novels or religious pamphlets that offer little in terms of real intellectual stimulation. Hosea has more formal education than most of us, and I sometimes see in him a deep frustration with the lack of intellectual companionship. He occasionally tries to initiate conversations about deeper topics, but is usually met with blank stares or active disinterest. The need for physical survival leaves little time or energy for intellectual needs. The lack of exposure to diverse ideas creates a kind of mental impoverishment that becomes self-reinforcing. People don't know what they don't know, so they don't miss knowledge they never possessed. This creates communities that are intellectually stagnant and resistant to change or improvement. Prejudices based on ignorance are deep and seemingly unshakable because people never encounter contradictory evidence or alternative perspectives. Racism, sexism, and other prejudices are reinforced by lack of exposure to different people or different ideas. Social change is almost impossible when people live in completely isolated bubbles. Scientific ignorance creates vulnerability to charlatans and schemes that exploit superstition and fear. Fake doctors sell miracle tonics that do nothing but separate people from their money. Preachers exploit religious fears to gain political and financial power. Politicians make impossible promises because voters don't have enough knowledge to evaluate feasibility. And there are still deeper aspects of this existence that test the very foundations of what it means to be human. Spiritual isolation is perhaps the most devastating aspect of all. In a world where violent death is common and injustice is endemic, fundamental questions about the meaning of existence become not just philosophical, but urgently practical. Why continue living when each day brings new evidence that the universe is fundamentally cruel and indifferent? Reverend Swanson struggles with these questions every day, and I see in his eyes the same doubt that haunts all of us occasionally. If there is a benevolent God, why does he allow children to die from curable diseases? Why do good men suffer while criminals prosper? Why does justice seem to be distributed randomly, if it's distributed at all? The morphine the Reverend uses is not just for physical pain. It's a desperate attempt to silence existential questions that have no satisfactory answers. In a world without psychologists or antidepressants, where showing emotional vulnerability is seen as dangerous weakness, mind-altering substances offer the only available relief for spiritual anguish. Dutch tries to create meaning through his grandiose philosophy and elaborate plans, but even he can't completely escape the fundamental futility of our situation. His speeches about freedom and civilization are attempts to impose intellectual order on a world that defies any attempt at rational understanding. The question of personal morality becomes incredibly complex when you're constantly forced to choose between different kinds of evil: stealing food to feed hungry people in camp versus leaving honest merchants without sustenance, killing a violent man to protect an innocent woman versus avoiding more violence and allowing abuse to continue, remaining loyal to friends who are making destructive decisions versus abandoning them to save yourself. There are no right answers to these moral dilemmas, only choices that will have consequences you'll have to carry for the rest of your life. Each decision erodes a little more of your confidence in your own moral compass until you're no longer sure what the difference is between right and wrong. John struggles with this constantly regarding Abigail and Jack. He loves his family, but knows that his presence in their lives puts them in mortal danger. Is it more moral to stay and try to protect them, risking drawing violence to them? Or is it more moral to leave and leave them vulnerable, but not marked as associates of known criminals? These aren't abstract questions. They're practical decisions that need to be made every day, and each choice has the potential to result in the death of people you love. The weight of this responsibility is crushing, especially when you have no reliable social or religious structures to offer guidance. The gradual corruption of innocence is something I watch happen with Lenny in a way that breaks my heart. When he joined us, he still had a kind of youthful optimism and belief in the possibility of human goodness. Now, I see that hope being systematically destroyed by the events he witnesses and the actions he's forced to take. There's no way to completely protect someone from the brutality of this life while they remain part of it. Each shootout, each robbery, each death that Lenny witnesses adds another layer of cynicism and hardness to his character. I'm watching a decent young man being transformed into something harder and less human, and there's nothing I can do to stop it. Sean used to be our source of lightness and humor, but even his superficial joy was a psychological defense against realities that were too brutal to process directly. Beneath his jokes and laughter, there was the same darkness we all carry, the knowledge that we're living lives that diminish us as human beings. The loss of Sean eliminated one of the last sources of genuine joy in our group. His death wasn't just the loss of a friend, it was the loss of our last connection to the idea that it's possible to find happiness even in brutal circumstances. Now, when we try to make jokes or find moments of lightness, they sound forced and empty. Kieran represented the possibility of redemption and change, the idea that even someone who started as an enemy could become family. His brutal death and the way he was tortured by the O'Driscolls served as a reminder that kindness and loyalty offer no real protection in a world where people are willing to inflict suffering for its sadistic pleasure. What makes the deaths of our friends particularly devastating is that they're not just personal losses, they're confirmations that we're following a path that inevitably leads to destruction. Each person we lose is evidence that our choices are fundamentally self-destructive. But even knowing this, we continue because the alternatives seem even worse. Surrendering to authorities means prison or execution. Trying to live honestly means abandoning people who have become family. Separating means total loneliness in a world that is already brutally isolating. We're trapped in a cycle we know to be destructive, but we can't find a way to escape. That doesn't require sacrificing everything we still consider valuable. It's a kind of psychological prison that is more effective than any physical chains. Let me now explain some practical aspects of daily survival that may not be obvious to someone accustomed to modern convenience. Fire is simultaneously essential for survival and extremely dangerous to maintain. You need fire to cook food, heat water, keep warm, and ward off predators. But fire also attracts unwanted attention from long distances, consumes fuel constantly, and can easily spread and destroy everything you own. Collecting adequate firewood is constant and physically demanding work. Green wood doesn't burn well and produces excessive smoke. Rotten wood burns too quickly and produces little heat. Dry, seasoned wood burns well, but must be collected, cut to appropriate sizes, and stored in a way that keeps it dry. During winter, finding dry wood becomes a constant challenge. Snow covers potential fuel, and exposed wood absorbs moisture from the air. You can spend hours searching for dry branches under trees or trying to cut green wood that doesn't want to burn properly. Maintaining a fire through the night requires constant vigilance. Someone needs to wake up every few hours to add fuel, or the fire will die and leave everyone vulnerable to cold and predator. This means no one in camp ever gets a full, uninterrupted night's sleep. Starting fire without modern matches is a skill that requires practice and patience. Flint and steel can work, but need dry tinder and proper conditions. Wood friction can work, but requires considerable physical strength and specific knowledge about wood types. In wet conditions, starting fire can become almost impossible. The smoke produced by fire is another constant problem. Too little ventilation results in smoke that fills your shelter and makes breathing difficult. Too much ventilation extinguishes the fire or allows precious heat to escape. Finding the right balance requires experience and constant adjustments. Charles taught me that different types of wood produce different qualities of smoke, and this smoke can attract or repel insects, alert enemies to your location, or even poison you if you choose the wrong wood. Some woods produce toxic smoke that can cause illness or death if inhaled in enclosed spaces. Food is another constant challenge that goes far beyond simply finding something to eat. Preservation without refrigeration requires specific techniques that don't always work, and spoiled food can kill you as effectively as a bullet. Fresh meat needs to be consumed immediately or preserved through salting, smoking, or drying. Salt is expensive and not always available. Smoking requires specific woods and knowledge about how to maintain proper temperatures for long periods. Drying requires dry weather and protection from insects and animals. Even when properly preserved, salted or dried meat is almost impossible to chew without damaging teeth. It needs to be soaked in water to soften, but this also removes some of the salt preservation. During travel, you often don't have time or resources to properly prepare preserved meat. Hunting requires skills that take years to develop and equipment that is expensive and requires constant maintenance. Tracking is a complex art that involves reading footprints, droppings, feeding marks, and hundreds of other subtle signs. You can spend days following an animal only to lose it at the end. Even when you manage to kill an animal, processing the carcass is brutal and physically demanding work. You need to skin, clean, debone, and portion the meat before it starts to rot. This needs to be done in often less than ideal conditions, without proper tools, and often while watching for predators that are attracted by the smell of blood. Fishing is more reliable than hunting in some situations, but requires specialized equipment and knowledge about where and when fish can be found. Hooks are expensive and easily lost. Lines break, baits need to be collected or prepared specifically. Edible plants exist, but distinguishing safe plants from poisonous plants requires specialized knowledge that can be fatal if you get it wrong. Many toxic plants look very similar to edible plants. Even generally safe plants can be dangerous if prepared incorrectly or consumed at the wrong time of year. Tilly knows more about medicinal and edible plants than most of us, but even she admits there are plants she wouldn't dare try to identify without absolute certainty. A misidentification can result in poisoning that causes prolonged agony followed by death. Wild berries and fruits can provide essential vitamins, but are only available seasonally and usually in limited quantities. Wild animals compete for the same resources, and you can spend hours searching only to discover that others have already harvested everything that was available. Nuts and seeds can provide essential protein and fats, but usually require extensive processing to be digestible. Acorns usually have hard shells that are difficult to crack without proper tools. Many seeds are toxic raw and need to be prepared in specific ways. Clean water is another constant challenge that can kill you in multiple ways. Dehydration kills faster than hunger, but contaminated water can cause diseases that kill more slowly but with equal certainty. Rivers and streams may look clean, but be contaminated by animal or human waste upstream. There's no way to know if water is safe just by looking at it. Standing water in puddles or lakes often contains bacteria or parasites that cause violent dysentery. Boiling water kills most pathogens, but requires fuel to maintain fire and proper containers for heating. During travel, you may not have time or resources to boil all the water you need to drink. You're often forced to gamble with water from questionable sources. Wells may seem safer than surface water, but are often contaminated by seepage from waste or animal carcasses that fell in and weren't removed. Some wells contain natural minerals that are toxic in high concentrations. Rain can provide relatively clean water, but you need means to collect and store it, and rain isn't reliable in many regions. Melted snow can provide water, but the melting process consumes precious fuel and may not produce adequate volume. Water storage requires containers that are heavy to transport and prone to breaking or leaking. Stored water can become contaminated by bacteria that reproduce in dirty containers. You need to clean containers regularly, but this requires additional water that may not be available. During droughts, water sources you depend on can dry up completely, forcing you to travel dangerous distances in search of alternative. During floods, normal water sources can become turbulent and unfit to drink. Charles showed me how to identify signs of hidden water, specific vegetation that indicates groundwater, rock formations that might indicate springs, animal behaviors that can lead to water sources. But even with this knowledge, finding adequate water can take days of searching. Shelter is another basic necessity that is much more complex than it seems. You need protection from weather, animals, and other humans, but any structure you build can also become a trap if you're discovered by enemies. Canvas tents offer basic protection from rain and wind, but are noisy during storms, easily damaged by branches or animals, and provide minimal insulation against cold. They're also visible from long distances and can attract unwanted attention. Improvised shelters, made from branches and leaves, can be effective if built correctly, but require considerable time to build properly. They also need to be rebuilt frequently as materials degrade or are dispersed by wind. Caves offer excellent protection from weather, but are often already occupied by dangerous animals. Bears, panthers, and even bats can make caves more dangerous than sleeping in the open. You can also become trapped in caves by landslides or flash floods. Building more permanent structures requires tools, skills, and time that may not be available. Cutting suitable trees requires saws or axes in good condition. Transporting heavy wood requires physical strength or pack animals. Connecting timbers requires nails, ropes, or traditional carpentry techniques. Even well-built structures can be destroyed by severe weather, fires, or simple natural deterioration. Wood rots, especially in humid climates. Roofs leak and need constant repairs. Foundations shift and cause structural problems. Adequate insulation against cold requires specific materials that aren't always available. Animal skins can work, but need to be properly prepared to avoid decomposition and insect infestation. Straw can provide insulation, but also attracts rodents and other pests. Adequate ventilation is essential to avoid buildup of smoke or toxic gases, but also allows escape of precious heat. Finding the right balance between insulation and ventilation requires experience and constant adjustments based on weather conditions. Shelter security requires considerations that go beyond protection from elements. Multiple exits are essential for escape if the shelter is attacked or catches fire. Defensible positions are important if you're forced to fight from the shelter. Hidden location is crucial to avoid detection by enemies. The logistics of constant movement add additional complications. Any shelter you build may need to be abandoned quickly, so you can't invest excessive time or resources in permanent structures. You need to be able to pack essential supplies and move quickly with little notice. Clothing and equipment require constant maintenance that is difficult to perform properly without appropriate tools and repair materials. Fabrics tear and need patching. Leather dries out and cracks. Metal rusts and requires regular cleaning. Boots are particularly critical because foot problems can quickly make you unable to travel or escape danger. Leather soles wear out quickly on rough terrain. Seams open and allow entry of water and debris. Wet leather shrinks and can cause blisters or wounds. Repairing boots requires heavy needles, strong thread, and leather pieces for patches. You also need tools to make holes in thick leather and knowledge about specific sewing techniques for leather work. Poor work can make boots less effective than being barefoot. Hats are essential for protection from sun, rain, and cold, but are also easily lost during strong winds or intense physical activity. A lost hat can result in severe sunburn, hypothermia, or other weather-related problems. Coats and outerwear need to be water-resistant, but also allow full movement for activities like shooting or fighting. Heavy materials offer protection but limit mobility. Light materials offer freedom of movement but inadequate protection. Underwear may seem less important, but problems like chafing or fungal infections can quickly become debilitating if not properly treated. Fabrics that don't breathe cause moisture buildup. Rough fabrics cause irritation that can evolve into open wounds. Washing clothes requires adequate water, soap, which is expensive and not always available, and time for complete drying. Clothes that don't dry completely can develop mold or create conditions for bacterial growth. During winter, Wet clothes can freeze and become impossible to wear. Essential survival equipment includes knives, axes, ropes, and other items that require specialized maintenance. Metal blades need to be sharpened regularly and protected from rust. Wooden handles can break and need replacement. Ropes rot and lose strength. Sharpening knives and axes properly requires whetstones of adequate quality and knowledge about appropriate angles and techniques. Improper sharpening can make tools more dangerous to the user than useful for work. Excessive sharpening can remove unnecessary metal and reduce tool lifespan. Ropes are essential for hundreds of tasks, from tying loads to horses to building shelters and climbing difficult terrain. But natural fiber ropes rot when wet, stretch when damp, and can break without warning under stress. You need to inspect ropes regularly and replace damaged sections. Making adequate ropes from natural materials requires specific knowledge about which plants produce strong fibers, how to process these fibers, and how to braid or twist fibers into ropes that won't break under use. This specialized knowledge can take years to master. Horse maintenance adds another layer of complexity to survival. Horses aren't machines. They're living animals with their own needs that must be met if you expect them to remain useful. Proper feeding for horses requires knowledge about which plants are nutritious versus which are toxic to equines. Many plants that are safe for humans are poisonous to horses. Horses also need specific amounts of different types of nutrition: grains for energy, hay for fiber, salt for electrolytes. During winter, finding adequate forage for horses becomes extremely difficult. Grass is dead or covered by snow. Deciduous trees have lost their leaves. You may be forced to share your own limited food with horses, or allow horses to starve and become useless. Veterinary care for horses is essential but difficult to provide without training. Horses can become lame for dozens of different reasons: stones in hooves, loose horseshoes, muscle injuries, infections. Diagnosing problems requires experience, and treatment often requires medications that aren't available. Horseshoes protect horse hooves from wear on rough terrain, but also require professional maintenance that may not be available. Loose horseshoes can cause injuries. Lost horseshoes leave horses vulnerable to hoof damage that can make them permanently lame. Sick or injured horses become burdens that can compromise the survival of the entire group. A horse that can't be ridden still needs to be fed and cared for, but offers no utility. Deciding when to abandon or slaughter an injured horse are morally difficult choices that also have practical implications. Tack, saddles, reins, bits requires constant maintenance and eventual replacement. Leather dries out and cracks, metal corrodes, seams open. Broken tack can result in injuries to rider and horse, and can also allow horses to escape at critical moments. Horses have individual personalities and can be stubborn, skittish, or aggressive in ways that complicate their usefulness. A horse that refuses to cross water can force you to find alternative routes that add days to travel. A horse that spooks easily can leave you stranded at dangerous moments. Proper horse training takes time and patience that you may not have. Untrained horses are dangerous to ride and difficult to control. Even well-trained horses can develop bad habits if not handled properly. Correcting behavioral problems in horses requires specialized skills. Dependence on horses also creates strategic vulnerabilities. Enemies who manage to spook or injure your horses can effectively immobilize you. Horses make noise and leave tracks that make stealthy movement difficult. Horses need water and food regularly, limiting where you can travel. During shootouts or other combat situations, horses can panic and flee, leaving you on foot at moments when you most need mobility. Training horses to remain calm during violence requires gradual exposure to noise and confusion that isn't always practical. Even with all these practical challenges of basic survival, there are still deeper psychological aspects of this existence that test the limits of human sanity. The constant paranoia necessary for survival as an outlaw eventually erodes your ability to form normal relationships or trust anyone completely. You learn to sleep lightly and wake at the slightest strange sound. You learn to assess strangers as potential threats before considering them as people. You learn to plan escape routes from any situation before engaging in it. This constant hypervigilance is mentally and physically exhausting. You can never completely relax, never completely lower your guard, never trust that you're safe in any situation. The constant stress causes physical problems, headaches, digestive issues, chronic muscle tension. Violence becomes normalized in a way that would be shocking to people living in civilized societies. You stop being startled by gunshots. You stop being disturbed by the sight of blood or bodies. You stop being emotionally affected by violent death of people you don't know personally. This desensitization is a necessary survival mechanism, but it also represents a fundamental loss of humanity. When you stop caring about human suffering that doesn't directly affect you or people close to you, you've lost something essential about what it means to be human. Morality becomes situational in a way that makes ethical decisions impossible to make with confidence. Stealing is wrong, but what if you're stealing to feed hungry people? Killing is wrong, but what if you're killing to protect innocence? Lying is wrong, but what if lying saves lives? Without reliable social or religious structures to provide moral guidance, you're forced to make ethical choices based on incomplete information and under extreme pressure. The consequences of these choices can haunt you for the rest of your life, especially when you later learn information that would have changed your decisions. Extreme social isolation forces you to find ways to maintain your sanity without adequate external support. Some men talk to themselves. Others develop elaborate rituals or superstitions. Some lose themselves in fantasies or memories that may not correspond to reality. Dutch has created an elaborate and grandiose philosophy to give meaning to our actions, but even this philosophy is becoming increasingly disconnected from the reality of our current situations. His speeches about freedom and civilization are beautiful, but they don't help when we're hungry, injured, or being pursued by armed men. The lack of a predictable future makes long-term planning impossible and saps motivation for self-improvement or personal growth. When you don't know if you'll be alive next week, it's hard to care about learning new skills or developing deep relationships. This forced short-term orientation eventually erodes your ability to imagine or work toward long-term goals. You become reactive instead of proactive, responding to immediate crises instead of working towards sustainable improvements in your situation. The gradual loss of personal dignity through necessary moral compromises eventually affects your self-esteem and sense of self-worth. Each line you cross, each principle you abandon out of necessity, each terrible choice you're forced to make adds weight to the psychological burden you carry. Hosea told me that sometimes he doesn't recognize the man he's become compared to the young man he was when he started this life. This kind of alienation from self is common among people living lives that constantly force them to act against their fundamental value. The gradual brutalization of empathy through constant exposure to suffering eventually makes it difficult to emotionally connect with other people, even those you love. You can care for someone intellectually while feeling emotionally disconnected from their suffering. This emotional disconnection is another survival mechanism that protects your mental sanity, but it also makes intimate relationships difficult or impossible to maintain. How can you love someone completely when you've learned to turn off your emotions to survive? And there are still economic realities of this existence that complicate every aspect of survival in ways modern people rarely consider. Cash money is scarce and difficult to keep safe. You can't deposit money in banks because banks keep records that can be used to track you. You need to carry all your money with you, but this makes you a target for theft. Hiding money means risking it being found by others or lost if you're forced to leave the area quickly. Even when you have money, basic goods are often expensive or simply not available in remote areas. An item that costs a few cents in a big city can cost dollars at an isolated trading post, if it's available at all. Credit or tabs are impossible for known criminals, so all transactions must be in cash. This means you need to carry enough money for any purchase you might need to make, but carrying too much money makes you an attractive target. Bartering can work in some situations, but requires that you have goods that other people want and that you're willing to trade. It also requires face-to-face negotiation that can expose you to recognition or betrayal. The value of goods fluctuates dramatically based on location and season. A blanket worth a few dollars in summer can be worth 10 times more during a snowstorm. Information about demand and supply is limited and often outdated. Medicines and medical supplies are particularly expensive and difficult to obtain legitimately. Doctors may hesitate to sell to strangers, especially strangers who look suspicious or who pay in cash without asking questions. Ammunition is another expensive item that you need constantly, but that also attracts attention when purchased in large quantities. Sellers may become suspicious if you buy too much ammunition at once, especially if you don't appear to be a legitimate hunter or rancher. Specialized tools and equipment often need to be ordered and can take weeks or months to arrive. You can't simply walk into a store and buy anything you need immediately. Poor planning can leave you without essential items at critical moments. Transportation of purchased goods adds logistical complications. Heavy or bulky items are difficult to transport on horseback. Fragile items can break during rough travel. Valuable items attract attention from thieves. Economies of scale work against you when you're buying individual items instead of commercial volumes. Unit prices are always higher, and you're often forced to accept inferior quality because you can't afford better quality items. Seasonality dramatically affects availability and prices of basic items. Winter clothing is scarce and expensive during summer when you can't predict you'll need it. Preserved foods are more expensive at the end of winter when stocks are low. Information about prices and availability is limited and often outdated. You can travel hundreds of miles to discover that items you expected to buy aren't available or cost much more than you expected. There are still aspects of family life in the Old West that add layers of emotional complexity that would be difficult for modern people to fully understand. Romantic relationships are complicated by the reality that you may need to abandon anyone you love with little or no notice. Forming deep attachments becomes a vulnerability that can be exploited by enemies, or that can force you into impossible choices between love and survival. John struggles with this constantly. He loves Abigail and Jack deeply, but also knows that his presence in their lives puts them in mortal danger. Every moment of family happiness is shadowed by the knowledge that it can be violently interrupted at any moment. Marriage offers none of the legal or social protections it offers in more civilized societies. Women married to criminals are often seen as accomplices and can be pursued by authority. Children of criminals may be considered social bastards regardless of the legitimacy of their births. Establishing a permanent home is impossible when you're constantly running from the law. You can't buy land, can't build a house, can't plant crops that take seasons to mature. Your entire existence is temporary and mobile. Educating children becomes almost impossible when you're constantly moving and living in primitive conditions. There are no schools to attend, no books to read, no stability sufficient for consistent learning. Children grow up illiterate and without practical skills beyond basic survival. Jack rarely has opportunities to play with other children or experience normal childhood. He's constantly exposed to violence, vulgar language, and criminal behavior. There's no way to completely protect him from the brutality of our existence while he remains with us. Family traditions and celebrations become impossible to maintain when you never know where you'll be on any specific date. Holidays pass unnoticed or are marked only by melancholy recognition of what you've lost. Connections with extended family are permanently severed when you become an outlaw. You can't visit relatives, can't receive letters, can't participate in weddings or funerals. You essentially die to your former family when you choose this life. The concept of inheritance or leaving something for future generations becomes meaningless when you own nothing permanent and can die at any moment. You can't build wealth, can't establish businesses, can't create lasting legacies. Planning for old age is impossible when you'll likely die violently before aging. There are no pensions, no retirement savings, no established children to care for you. Your only hope is to die quickly instead of slowly from disease or injury. And there are still aspects of group psychology that make our camp dynamics particularly toxic and destructive. Dominance hierarchies are maintained through intimidation and violence, creating an environment where questioning authority can quickly escalate to physical confrontation. Even when leaders make clearly poor decisions, challenging them publicly can result in expulsion from the group or violence. Micah understands these dynamics perfectly and manipulates them for his own ends. He undermines the authority of people who might oppose him while reinforcing his own position by whispering in Dutch's ear. His tactics are effective because they exploit psychological weaknesses we all have. Divisions within the group deepen over time as external pressures increase. People who were once friends begin to suspect each other. Secrets are kept where there was once transparency. Paranoia spreads like a contagious disease. Limited resources create constant competition between group members, even when everyone pretends to work together. Better food, more reliable equipment, stronger horses. Everything is in limited demand, and some members inevitably receive more than others. This competition is rarely open or direct, but manifests in subtle politics and alliance formation. People form smaller groups within the larger group, creating divisions that weaken overall cohesion. Loyalties fragment along lines that may not be obvious until it's too late. The pressure of living in constant proximity with armed and temperamental people creates tensions that periodically explode into violence. Small irritations accumulate over time until trivial arguments become serious confrontations. Bill and Micah almost killed each other last week over an argument about who should feed the horses. Lack of privacy means personal problems become group drama that affects everyone. Romantic relationships are conducted under public scrutiny. Health problems can't be hidden. Emotional weaknesses are exposed and can be exploited by others. Decisions are often made by Dutch without adequate consultation with people who will be affected by them. This creates resentment and a sense of powerlessness among group members who are expected to follow orders without question, even when those orders seem unwise or dangerous. The lack of a fair system for resolving disputes means conflicts tend to fester until they explode into violence. There is no impartial court, no neutral mediation. Disputes are resolved through force or through favoritism by leadership. Information is another resource that is distributed unequally within the group. Dutch and Hosea know things they don't share with the rest of us. Micah whispers secrets to Dutch that influence decisions but are never revealed publicly. This information inequality creates paranoia and distrust. The group culture encourages displays of toxic masculinity that make emotional vulnerability dangerous to express. Men are expected to be tough, stoic, and always ready for violence. Showing fear, sadness, or uncertainty can be interpreted as weakness that undermines your position in the group. This pressure to maintain an emotional facade prevents people from properly processing trauma and stress. Psychological problems accumulate without resolution, eventually manifesting in destructive or violent behaviors that affect the entire group. Now let me explain how this brutal world I've described would specifically affect you, someone accustomed to the conveniences and protections of modern life. Your soft, protected skin would develop painful calluses blisters and cuts within days of rough manual labor. Your hands, accustomed to keyboards and touchscreens, would bleed constantly from holding rough reins, metal tools, and abrasive ropes. Every simple task would become a source of physical pain. Your digestive system, accustomed to processed and sanitarily prepared food, would rebel violently against poorly cooked meat, contaminated water, and the limited diet of preserved food. You would spend days nauseated, vomiting, or suffering from diarrhea that would leave you weak and dehydrated. Your lungs, accustomed to filtered and conditioned air, would struggle with constant smoke from campfires, dust from dirt roads, and cold, dry air that would cut your throat with every breath. You would develop a persistent cough and congestion that would never be completely cured. Your eyes, accustomed to controlled artificial lighting, would strain to adjust to constant natural light during the day and almost complete darkness at night. You would develop headaches from squinting against bright sunlight and from straining your vision in the low light conditions. Your sleep, accustomed to soft mattresses and controlled temperatures, would be constantly interrupted by pain from sleeping on hard surfaces, strange noises from the wilderness, and the need to maintain vigilance against predators and enemies. You would become chronically exhausted but unable to rest properly. Your personal hygiene, accustomed to daily showers and modern cleaning products, would deteriorate rapidly to the point of physical discomfort and social embarrassment. You would develop body odors, skin infections, and dental problems that would affect your overall health and social interactions. Your physical conditioning, accustomed to optional exercise and sedentary activity, would be completely inadequate for the constant physical demands of primitive survival. You would exhaust quickly and be unable to maintain the pace necessary to remain with the group. Your social skills, developed for civilized and polite society, would be completely inadequate for navigating the violent hierarchies and brutal honor code of the Old West. You would inadvertently insult people, violate unwritten norms, and put yourself in danger through cultural misunderstanding. Your emotional stability, accustomed to support systems and professional intervention, would crumble under constant stress and repeated trauma. You would develop paralyzing anxiety, debilitating depression, or other mental health problems that would be seen as weakness and could result in abandonment by the group. Your expectations of justice and fairness, developed in a society with a functioning legal system, would be constantly violated by brutal realities where might makes right and where innocence offers no protection. You would struggle to accept that the world can be fundamentally unjust and cruel. Your trust in authority and institutions, developed in a society where government and law generally function, would be completely destroyed by the reality, endemic corruption, and selective law enforcement. You would lose faith in basic concepts of social order and legal protection. Your problem-solving skills, developed for a world with abundant resources and technological solutions, would be inadequate for situations where resources are scarce and where solutions require violence or moral compromise. You would be paralyzed by the lack of good options. Your sense of time and planning, accustomed to precise schedules and reliable commitments, would be constantly frustrated by the imprecise and unpredictable nature of primitive life. You would struggle to accept that much of life is determined by factors beyond your control. And finally, after experiencing all these hardships and traumas, you would gradually lose connection with the person you were before. Your priorities would shift from self-actualization to basic survival. Your values would shift from abstract principles to brutal pragmatism. Your personality would change from complex and nuanced to hard and simplified. The process of adapting to this life would be simultaneously necessary for survival and devastating to your humanity. You would become effective at violence, but lose capacity for intimacy. You would become resistant to hardship, but lose capacity for joy you would become independent but lose capacity for trust. Now, as you lie in your comfortable bed, with your heated home and your basic needs satisfied, remember that all these hardships I've described are not dramatic exaggerations. They were simply daily realities for millions of people not so long ago. Remember that every convenience you take for granted, clean water from the tap, safe food from the refrigerator, heat from the thermostat, security from the police, medicine from the hospital, represents hundreds of years of human progress and countless sacrifices from people who came before you. Remember that your modern problems, however real and stressful they may be, exist against the backdrop of a life that is fundamentally safe, comfortable, and full of possibilities that people from the past couldn't even imagine. Let this perspective bring some peace to your thoughts as you fall asleep, knowing that you live in a moment of human history that, despite its imperfections, offers dignity, opportunity, and protection that were impossible luxuries for our ancestors. May this reflection on the hardships of the past help you find gratitude for the present and hope for the future, and may it bring tranquility to your mind as you enjoy the simple luxury of safe and peaceful rest. Sleep well, knowing that you are more fortunate than the vast majority of humans who have ever lived in this world, and that tomorrow will offer possibilities that people like me could only dream of. Even in our darkest moments in the Van der Linde gang, when hope seemed lost and the future uncertain, there was still the possibility of redemption, of change, of something better on the horizon. You have that same possibility multiplied by 1,000 through the opportunities and protections of your modern era. Use this perspective wisely, and may it bring peace to your dreams tonight. But there are still more aspects of this brutal existence that I need to share with you, details that paint an even more complete picture of the misery that was living in the American Old West of 1899. The most disturbing aspect of our existence is perhaps the complete absence of any reliable justice system. I'm not just talking about the corruption of local authorities, but about the reality that basic concepts like right and wrong become philosophical luxuries you simply can't afford to consider when you're struggling to survive. I've witnessed situations where good men were forced to do terrible things to protect their family. I've seen fathers steal food from other fathers to feed their own starving children. I've seen mothers lie to authorities about the whereabouts of criminal children, knowing that lie could result in the death of innocent people. Moral relativity becomes a daily reality when you realize that almost any action can be justified or condemned depending on context. Killing a man is murder unless you're protecting a child. Stealing is a crime unless you're preventing your family from starving. Lying is a sin unless the truth results in the death of friends. Dutch often speaks about our family and our principles, but the reality is that even our internal codes are constantly tested and violated by necessity. We promise never to hurt women or children, but then we encounter situations where a woman is trying to kill us, or where a child might report us to authorities. Hosea, the wisest among us, once told me that the first casualty of any war is morality, and that our war against civilized society has transformed us into something our younger selves would have found monstrous. This transformation doesn't happen all at once. It's a gradual erosion that you only notice when it's too late to reverse. The question of intimate relationships in this world adds layers of emotional complexity that are difficult to navigate. When you know you could die at any moment, every romantic interaction carries a desperate weight. You fall in love more intensely because it might be your last chance, but you also protect yourself emotionally because the pain of loss would be unbearable. Mary Linton represented for me the possibility of a different life, but also the impossibility of escaping what I've become. Our love was real, but it was doomed from the start because I couldn't offer her the stability and security she deserved. Every encounter was simultaneously a glimpse of happiness and a painful reminder of everything I had lost. The concept of free time simply doesn't exist when every waking moment is dedicated to basic survival. There are no weekends, no holidays, no moments of pure relaxation. Even when we're not actively engaged in crimes or fleeing from the law, we're maintaining equipment, caring for animals, searching for food, or planning our next move. This constant pressure creates a form of exhaustion that goes beyond the physical. It's an existential tiredness that permeates even the calmest moment. Even when your body is resting, your mind is always working, always worried, always anticipating the next threat or need. Uncle embodies an extreme form of escapism that, while pathetic in many ways, is also understandable as a survival strategy. His constant alcoholism and refusal to contribute significantly to the group are defense mechanisms against a reality he simply can't process properly. Gender dynamics in the Old West add special complications for the women in our group. They need to be strong enough to survive in brutal conditions, but also maintain some appearance of femininity to navigate social interactions in towns. This constant duplicity is exhausting and often contradictory. Susan Grimshaw tries to maintain order and morality in camp, but her rules often conflict with the practical realities of our situation. How do you maintain cleanliness standards when there's no adequate water? How do you maintain modesty when there's no privacy? How do you maintain morality when survival requires moral compromise? Sadie Adler represents a transformation that is simultaneously impressive and tragic. The brutal loss of her husband transformed her into one of the most effective and dangerous people I know, but it also eliminated almost all her capacity for gentleness or vulnerability. Her strength came at the cost of her humanity. The question of weapons and violence in the Old West goes far beyond simply knowing how to shoot. The psychological weight of carrying constant instruments of death, knowing you may need to use them at any moment, creates a mindset that is difficult to describe to people who have never experienced it. Every weapon you carry is simultaneously your protection and your condemnation. It can save your life, but it also makes you a target. It can solve problems, but also create new ones. It offers power, but also terrible responsibility. The simple act of strapping on a pistol in the morning is a reminder that you may need to kill someone before the day ends. Weapon maintenance in the harsh climate and primitive conditions of the Old West is constant work that can mean the difference between life and death. Moisture causes rust that can jam mechanisms. Dust clogs delicate actions. Temperature changes cause expansion and contraction that affects accuracy. A poorly maintained weapon is worse than no weapon because it offers a false sense of security. Ammunition is expensive and heavy, but you can't travel without it. Each cartridge represents money that could be spent on food or medical supplies. Each cartridge added to your belt is extra weight your horses need to carry, and that makes movement slower and more difficult. The psychology of armed combat is something that can't be adequately prepared for through target practice. When you're shooting at another human being who is shooting back, your perception changes, your time reacts differently, your accuracy is affected by adrenaline and fear. Men who are excellent shots under controlled conditions often fail completely during real combat. The sound of bullets passing near your head is something that never stops being terrifying, no matter how many times you experience it. That high-pitched whistle, followed by the solid impact of the bullet hitting something behind you, is a visceral reminder of how close you are to death at any moment. Bullet wounds create sensory experiences that haunt you long after the physical wounds heal. The sound a bullet makes piercing flesh is different from any other sound. The sensation of warm blood running down your body is something your brain never completely forgets. The pain isn't like pain from normal injuries. It's sharp and penetrating in a way that takes complete control of your consciousness. Seeing other men die violently affects you in ways you don't expect. The first time I saw a man get shot to death, I was surprised by how long it took for him to actually die. Movies and books make it seem like death by gunfire is instantaneous, but the reality is often much slower and more agonizing. Some men die screaming, others become silently confused, touching their wounds as if they can't understand what happened. Some try to keep fighting even after receiving mortal wounds. Some beg for their mothers in their final moments. None of these realities resemble heroic depictions of death in combat. The smell of burned gunpowder, blood, and death becomes associated in your mind with moments of maximum terror. Years later, similar smells can trigger vivid memories that transport you back to moments of combat, causing cold sweats and racing hearts even when you're in relative safety. The gradual brutalization of your sensitivity through repeated exposure to violence is a process you don't realize is happening until it's too late. You stop being startled by gunshots. You stop being nauseated by the sight of blood. You stop feeling empathy for people you don't know who are suffering. This desensitization is necessary for survival, but represents a fundamental loss of humanity. The legal aspects of being an outlaw in the Old West go far beyond simply avoiding local sheriffs. There's a complex network of bounty hunters, federal detectives, corporate agents, and vigilantes who operate with different motivations and methods. Pinkertons represent the most sophisticated and persistent form of law enforcement we face. They have resources, training, and determination that far exceed any local authority. They also have federal authority that allows them to operate across state lines and ignore local jurisdictions. Bounty hunters are more unpredictable and often more dangerous than regular law officers because they're motivated by profit instead of justice. They don't care if you're captured alive or dead, as long as they can prove your identity to collect the reward. Some bounty hunters are more criminal than the people they pursue. Local vigilantes can be the most dangerous of all because they operate without any legal oversight and are often motivated by personal revenge or prejudice. They don't follow legal procedures, don't respect prisoner rights, and often punish people based on suspicion instead of evidence. The wanted poster system means your physical appearance becomes a constant liability. You can't simply hide your identity. You need to actively disguise your appearance, growing or shaving beards, changing hair color and length, altering clothing and posture, all become necessary to avoid recognition. But even elaborate disguises have limitations. Distinctive scars, mannerisms, voices, and other personal traits can betray you regardless of how you change your appearance. Some people have exceptional memory for faces and can recognize you years after a brief encounter. The interconnected nature of communities in the Old West means information about outlaws spreads quickly through informal communication networks. Traveling merchants, stagecoach drivers, railroad workers, and others who move between communities carry news and gossip that can expose your location. The telegraph system allows rapid communication between authorities in different cities, making coordination of capture efforts more effective. A telegraph message can alert authorities hundreds of miles away about your presence in a matter of hours. Limited transportation infrastructure means there are only certain routes you can take between locations, making it easier for pursuers to anticipate your movements. Bridges, canyons, and other geographic features create choke points where ambushes can be set. The economics of criminal life in the Old West are fundamentally unsustainable in the long term. Each successful crime increases attention and resources dedicated to your capture. Each unsuccessful crime reduces your resources and options. There's no way to win this game. You can only prolong the inevitable. The medical aspects of life in the Old West that I haven't fully explored yet include mental health issues that were completely misunderstood and untreated properly. Psychological trauma from combat, which we now recognize as PTSD, was seen simply as cowardice or moral weakness. Men who developed anxiety, depression, or other mental problems due to repeated exposure to violence were expected to get over these problems through willpower. Reverend Swanson exemplifies how people dealt with psychological trauma in the absence of understanding or proper treatment. His morphine dependence is an attempt at self-medication for emotional pain he has no other ways to process. His struggle with religious faith reflects conflict between his beliefs and the brutal realities he's witnessed. Alcoholism was endemic, not just because of alcohol availability, but because it was literally the only form of psychological relief available to people dealing with constant traumatic stress. Karen, Uncle, and other group members use alcohol as emotional anesthesia against realities that are too painful to process sober. Neurological conditions caused by head injuries were common but completely misunderstood. Concussions from horse falls, blows during fights, or nearby explosions often resulted in personality changes, memory problems, or other symptoms that were interpreted as laziness or problematic behavior. Vision and hearing problems caused by repeated exposure to loud gunfire were universal among people living violent lives, but there was no way to correct these problems. Men gradually lost hearing and developed constant ear ringing that never went away. Age-related degenerative diseases were particularly brutal when combined with the need to maintain physical capacity for survival. Arthritis, back problems, and other conditions that are manageable today with medication and physical therapy made men completely useless for physical work. Hosea suffers from arthritis that makes riding horseback agonizing, especially during cold and wet weather. There's nothing we can do except give him alcohol for pain and accept that his mobility is constantly decreasing. In a society that values only physical capacity, aging is a slow death sentence. Dental problems were universal and extremely painful. Without preventive dental care, almost everyone developed cavities, abscesses, and infections that could spread to other parts of the body. Tooth extraction was often the only available treatment, and it was performed without anesthesia using primitive tools. Constant toothache can drive a person practically insane, affecting sleep, mood, and ability to concentrate. Tough men who would bravely face shootouts would be reduced to crying children by dental abscesses that couldn't be properly treated. Digestive problems caused by poor diet and contaminated water were constant companions. Ulcers, irritable bowel syndrome, and other gastrointestinal conditions caused chronic discomfort that affected every aspect of daily life. There were no effective medications, only home remedies of questionable efficacy. Skin diseases caused by constant exposure to elements, lack of proper hygiene, and parasites were visible on almost everyone. Eczema, psoriasis, fungal infections, and other dermatological conditions created constant itching, pain, and social embarrassment. Internal parasites were almost universal. Intestinal worms, roundworms, and other parasites caused malnutrition, fatigue, and chronic abdominal discomfort. Folk treatments were often more dangerous than the parasites themselves, involving ingestion of toxic substances in the hope of killing the worms. The geographic and cultural isolation of the Old West created unique forms of psychological deprivation that are difficult to imagine in the modern era of instant communication and rapid travel. People often spent months without seeing anyone new or having stimulating conversations with people from outside their immediate community. This lack of intellectual stimulation created a form of mental atrophy that affected critical thinking, capacity, and personal growth. The absence of diverse entertainment meant people depended almost entirely on their own minds for amusement. Storytelling, simple music, and basic games were the only forms of entertainment available. People with limited imaginations or depression suffered particularly under these conditions. News from the outside world arrived weeks or months late, if it arrived at all. People lived in information bubbles that created distorted perceptions of national and international events. This forced ignorance about external events created paranoia and conspiracy theories about things they couldn't understand. The lack of exposure to different cultures created deep and unshakable prejudices that were reinforced by isolation. Racism, sexism, and other prejudices were endemic because people never encountered contradictory evidence or alternative perspectives. Mary Beth represents a desperate search for intellectual stimulation in a world that offers very little. Her stolen books are more than entertainment. They're psychological salvation that connects her with worlds and ideas that would otherwise be completely inaccessible to her. The absence of art and beauty in daily life created a form of aesthetic hunger that affected emotional well-being. Without museums, concerts, impressive architecture, or other forms of artistic expression, people lived in environments that were functional but aesthetically empty. This aesthetic deprivation contributed to depression and a general sense that life was just basic survival without possibility of transcendence or beauty. Rare moments of natural beauty, spectacular sunsets, impressive mountain landscapes, gained almost religious significance because they were so rare. The primitive technology of the Old West created dependence on traditional skills that took years to master and were easily lost through injury or age. Blacksmithing was essential for maintaining tools, weapons, and equipment, but requires considerable physical strength and specialized knowledge about metallurgy. An experienced blacksmith was irreplaceable in any community, but was also vulnerable to injuries that could end his career instantly. Carpentry was necessary for construction and repair of structures, vehicles, and basic furniture, but suitable wood wasn't always available, and carpentry tools were expensive and required specialized maintenance. Skilled carpenters were valued, but also exploited by communities that depended on their skills. Leatherwork was essential for making and repairing saddles, boots, belts, and other essential items, but properly preparing leather requires knowledge about tanning, cutting, sewing, and chemical treatments that are complex and time-consuming. Poorly prepared leather deteriorates quickly and can be dangerous to use. Herbal medicine represents one of the few forms of medical care available, but distinguishing medicinal plants from toxic plants requires years of experience that is often transmitted orally through generations. Losing an experienced healer can leave entire communities without access to any form of medical treatment. Tilly possesses some knowledge of herbal medicine she learned from her grandmother, but even she admits there are many things she doesn't dare try because the risks of error are too high. A misidentification of a plant can kill someone you're trying to help. Food preparation and preservation requires knowledge about salting, smoking, drying, and fermentation techniques that are complex and precise. Poorly preserved food can cause poisoning that kills, but unpreserved food deteriorates quickly and leaves people hungry. Navigation and orientation in unknown territory requires skills in map reading, astronomical observation, and interpretation of geographic features that take considerable time to develop. Getting lost in hostile territory is often a death sentence. Charles possesses tracking and navigation skills that are invaluable for our survival, but these skills are the product of years of experience and traditional education that can't be quickly transmitted to other group members. The seasons in the Old West present unique challenges that go far beyond simply being cold in winter or hot in summer. Spring brings torrential rains that transform roads into impassable swamps, rivers into dangerous torrents, and camps into puddles of mud. Flash floods can destroy supplies, drown animals, and force location changes with little warning. Spring thaw creates particularly dangerous conditions where seemingly solid ice can break without warning, sending riders and horses into icy waters. Rivers that seemed safe to cross in the morning can become impassable by afternoon due to increased water volume from melting. Summer brings extreme heat that can cause heat stroke, dehydration, and death. Temperatures over 115 degrees Fahrenheit are common in desert regions, and there's no air conditioning or refrigeration for relief. Shade is scarce and often inadequate for real protection. Wildfires during dry summer can spread with terrifying speed, forcing evacuation of entire areas with little warning. Smoke from distant fires can make breathing difficult and obscure vision for days. Ash falling from the sky covers food, water, and equipment. Autumn requires intense preparation for winter that can mean the difference between life and death. Collecting sufficient firewood, preserving adequate food, and repairing shelters must be completed before severe weather makes these activities impossible. The urgency of autumn preparation creates tensions in the group because there's always more work than time available. Decisions about resource allocation and priorities can cause conflicts that divide groups when unity is most needed. Winter is the deadliest season, especially in the mountains where temperatures can drop to 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Exposure for short periods can cause frostbite, resulting in amputation. Exposure for long periods results in death. Blizzards can last days and deposit meters of snow that make travel impossible and isolate groups completely. Being trapped by blizzards without adequate supplies is a terrifying experience that can last weeks. Wind during winter storms isn't just cold, it's a physical force that can knock down trees, destroy temporary structures, and make outdoor movement almost impossible. Zero visibility conditions create situations where people can get lost meters from safety. Maintaining fire during winter storms requires constant vigilance and abundant supplies of dry fuel. If the fire dies during a blizzard, relighting it can be impossible, condemning anyone in the shelter. Fuel for heating must be collected constantly throughout winter, but heavy snow can make firewood collection impossible for days. Fuel rationing becomes a life or death decision when you don't know how long a storm will last. Frozen food becomes difficult or impossible to prepare when fuel is limited. Frozen water must be melted before use, consuming precious fuel. Essential equipment can break due to extreme cold. Animals during winter require special care that can exhaust limited human resources. Horses need shelter, food, and water that may not be available. Allowing animals to die means losing essential transportation and work capacity. Forced isolation during winter storms creates interpersonal tensions that can explode into violence. People trapped together in small spaces for days or weeks, under constant stress about survival, often develop conflicts that can become fatal. Cabin fever is a real phenomenon where prolonged isolation causes psychological symptoms, including extreme irritability, paranoia, and even hallucinations. In a group where everyone is armed and temperamental, cabin fever can result in unnecessary deaths. The question of medical supplies during winter is particularly critical because injuries that would be minor in other seasons can become fatal when combined with extreme cold and limited resources. A wound that bleeds profusely can cause death more quickly in freezing temperatures because the body can't maintain core temperature while losing blood. Wounds that would heal normally can become infected when the immune system is compromised by cold exposure. Medications can freeze and become useless. Bandages can freeze and become too stiff to use effectively. Basic medical instruments can become painfully cold to touch and difficult to manipulate with numb fingers. During our forced stay in the Grizzly Mountains, I saw firsthand how extreme winter conditions reduce people to the most basic survival instincts. Rational decisions become impossible when you're constantly cold, hungry, and exhausted. Normal social hierarchy breaks down when everyone is equally vulnerable to the elements. Dutch's authority was significantly diminished when he was as cold and miserable as the rest of us. Survival becomes democratic in a way that can be both liberating and terrifying. But perhaps the most devastating aspect of severe winter is how it forces you to confront your own mortality in a way that's impossible to ignore. Each day you survive feels like a miracle, but also a reminder of how close you are to not surviving the next. The knowledge that you could freeze to death in your sleep makes every night a gamble with your life. You go to bed not knowing if you'll wake up, and this constant uncertainty takes a psychological toll that's difficult to describe. Now, after painting this comprehensive picture of misery and suffering, I want you to understand that these are not exaggerations intended for dramatic effect. These were simply the everyday realities for millions of people who lived not so long ago, including members of my own outlaw family. Every convenience you take for granted, from the simple act of turning a tap to get clean water to the luxury of adjusting a thermostat for comfort, represents centuries of human progress and countless sacrifices from people who came before you. Your smartphone contains more information and communication power than entire civilizations possessed. Your modern medicine can cure diseases that were death sentences just generations ago. Your legal system, despite its imperfections, offers protections and recourse that were unimaginable to people like me. Even your modern problems, however real and stressful they may be, exist against the backdrop of a life that is fundamentally safe, comfortable, and full of possibilities that people from the past couldn't even dream of imagining. When you worry about career choices, you're exercising a luxury that most humans throughout history never possessed. When you worry about relationships, you're engaging with emotional complexities that people focused only on survival never had time to explore. Let this perspective on the hardships of the past help you find gratitude for the present and hope for the future. Let it remind you that even in your darkest moments, you possess advantages and opportunities that were impossible dreams for your ancestors. May this reflection bring peace to your mind as you settle into the comfort of your warm bed, knowing that tomorrow offers possibilities that people like me could only hope for in our most optimistic fantasies. Sleep well, knowing that you are more fortunate than the vast majority of humans who have ever lived in this world, and that each day you wake up safe and protected is a gift that should never be taken for granted, even in our most desperate moments in the Van der Linde gang. When hope seemed lost and the future uncertain, there was still the possibility of redemption, of change, of something better on the horizon. You have that same possibility, multiplied by 1,000 through the opportunities and protections of your modern era. Use this wisdom well, and may it bring lasting tranquility to your dreams tonight and every night to come.